Berlin enters the early years of the war with a growing sense of danger. By 1940, Allied bombing raids become stronger and more frequent. Mobile flak units struggle to keep up, and ordinary bunkers cannot survive direct hits from heavy bombs. German planners decide the city needs a new kind of air defense, something larger, stronger, and able to fire at high altitude with unmatched power. From this idea comes the first design sketches of the Flaktürme, a fortress-like tower built from thick reinforced concrete, tall enough to command entire districts. This is the 128mm Flak Zwilling, the massive twin-barrel gun mounted on the Flaktürme towers of Berlin and Hamburg. As engineers refine the plan, the tower grows far beyond a simple platform. It becomes a multi-level block with walls several meters thick. Inside it are ammunition rooms, generators, ventilation shafts, crew quarters, and communication centers. The structure is designed not only to fire heavy guns, but also to survive anything the Allies drop on it. Construction begins with urgency. Workers pour concrete day and night. Cranes swing steel beams across neighborhoods. The towers rise steadily into the skyline, becoming immovable shapes above the city streets. The most important part of each tower is the weapon waiting to be installed. The 128mm Flak Zwilling, a twin-barrel heavy anti-aircraft gun with immense range and destructive power. When the first mount arrives in Berlin, crews guide the long barrels into position with cranes and heavy cables. The size of the weapon surprises even experienced gunners. Each barrel fires a shell large enough to destroy an aircraft with a single hit, and the twin mount can fire them almost simultaneously. Tests shake dust from nearby rooftops. The thunder of the double blast echoes across entire districts. Inside the Flaktürme, life begins to take shape. Hallways connect narrow rooms filled with ammunition racks. Lifts carry shells from deep storage chambers to the top platform. Radar equipment and rangefinders feed data directly to the fire control team. Generators hum constantly, powering the entire interior. The structure feels more like a battleship, anchored to the ground, than a simple defensive tower. Crews train to operate in tight coordination because the Zwilling's extreme rate of fire demands speed and discipline. Loaders practice handling the heavy shells. Fire control officers rehearse calculations. Radar operators drill until they can track incoming aircraft quickly and clearly. For the citizens of Berlin, the Flaktürme becomes a symbol of protection. Its concrete walls tower over apartment blocks and streets. Children point at the structure on walks. Adults talk about its strength and the reassurance it brings during air raid alerts. Many believe the tower is the safest place in the city. Yet, for military planners, the Flaktürme represents something more significant. With its height, radar range, and twin 128mm barrels, it can reach Allied aircraft long before they approach their targets. It becomes the center of a new defensive network meant to force reconnaissance planes higher, push them away from key locations, and disrupt every aspect of Allied planning. As construction finishes, the tower stands ready for its first real mission. The barrels rest quietly on the rooftop platform, pointed toward the sky. The crew waits inside the thick concrete walls, trained and prepared. For the Allies, the towers are still curiosities on reconnaissance photos. For the Luftwaffe, they are the most powerful anti-aircraft positions ever built in Germany. Soon, the calm skyline will change. The first Allied aircraft will approach, and the twin-barreled giant will reveal the strength that will make it one of the most feared defensive weapons of the war. The first Allied reconnaissance crews begin to notice strange shapes rising from Berlin's districts during desieges. The early months of 1941. From high altitude, The towers look like solid cubes with flat roofs and tiny dots positioned along their edges. Pilots flying at safe distances mark them on maps, but do not yet understand what purpose these structures serve. Many assume they are new observation posts or heavy command bunkers. The truth becomes clear only when crews fly closer on early morning missions, hoping to capture updated photographs of railway yards and industrial zones. The towers stand untouched by past bombing runs, showing no cracks, no damage, no smoke marks. This alone creates a quiet sense of suspicion among the crews tasked with entering Berlin's airspace again. For the Luftwaffe gunners stationed on top of the Flaktürme, the first sightings are moments of anticipation. Radar operators inside the tower track the incoming flights as they cross the city's outer ring. They call out positions, altitudes, and closing speeds. Rangefinders on the top platform swing into motion. The gunners prepare the twin barrels of the 128mm Flak Zwilling and wait for the command. The air is still, almost silent, broken only by the soft hum of the targeting instruments. Below them, the city feels unaware of the events about to unfold in the sky. When the reconnaissance plane enters range, the command comes without hesitation. The gunners fire the first double shot of the Zwilling against a live target. The recoil shakes the entire platform, making the steel supports vibrate. Each shell climbs upward with extreme force, leaving a thin trail that stretches into the bright morning light. The Allied pilot does not see the shot until it is already past his wingtip. The sudden shock of a heavy shell passing so close sends a wave of fear through the cockpit. The crew reacts instantly, banking away from the city and climbing higher. They expect normal flak bursts, steady puffs that appear from predictable angles. The Zwilling behaves differently. Its shells rise faster, and the pattern in the sky feels wider and more dangerous. Inside the aircraft, the photographer can feel the airframe tremble from the sudden maneuver. The camera equipment thumps against the fuselage. The pilot shouts information to the navigator about sharply climbing fragments near the port side. The crew sees more flashes coming from the top of a single massive block of concrete below. Two bright points ignite at the same moment, sending twin lines of fire upward. These lines spread apart and curve slightly as they rise. Every second brings the shells closer. The pilot struggles to keep a safe distance while still completing the mission. Below, the gunners move quickly through their practiced routine. Shells lift up from the ammunition rooms deep inside the tower. Loaders slide them into the chambers with practiced speed. Fire control officers call out adjustments to elevation and lead angle. The Zwilling fires again. The double thunder echoes across blocks of apartments and empty lots. Windows rattle in nearby buildings. The concussive force sends dust swirling off the rooftop. Civilians on the streets look up and see the sky fill with sharp flashes. For the reconnaissance crew, the moment feels endless. The plane shakes with every gust of air. The pilot tries to maintain a shallow climb, hoping to escape the tower's range without entering the altitude of other flak batteries around the city. The photographer finally captures a partial series of images before the aircraft reaches safer air. But the mission ends with a sense of confusion. No other flak battery in Berlin fires like this. No other weapon pushes shells upward with such power from a single point. When the crew returns to base, their report draws immediate attention. Intelligence officers gather around the photographs and note the presence of a large square building with turret-like structures on its roof. The shape resembles nothing seen before in German air defense. As analysts study the pattern of fire captured in witness sketches, they realize the weapon likely uses an unusually heavy caliber. The idea of a 128mm twin mount sounds excessive even for German engineers, but the crew insists on the size of the muzzle flash and the speed of the rounds. Over the next weeks, more reconnaissance flights approach Berlin, each with similar results. Every time a crew flies too close to the same district, the sky erupts with twin bursts that rise at a frightening pace. Pilots begin warning each other about a no-go block in Berlin. They describe it as a place where something large waits silently until an aircraft crosses an invisible line. Once that line is crossed, the weapon reacts faster than expected, leaving almost no chance to correct course. Even experienced pilots who flew over heavy flak zones in the Ruhr region remark that the Berlin Tower feels different. It seems to reach higher and spread its pattern wider. Inside the tower, the crew grows more confident. Each successful engagement reinforces their belief in the structure and its weapon. Radar operators grow familiar with the pacing of Allied flights and learn how to track small differences in altitude. Gunners become accustomed to the weight of the shells and the timing of the double recoil. Every engagement teaches them more about how reconnaissance crews attempt to evade the Zwilling's fire. They adjust their methods and prepare for the next encounter. By late 1941, Berlin's Flaktürme becomes known among Allied reconnaissance pilots as a silent threat that transforms into a violent guardian the moment they stray into its zone. The tower's presence changes not only the flight paths, but the confidence of crews sent into the city. Many missions return with incomplete photos. Some crews refuse to fly directly over the tower's district. A new phase of fear settles in as pilots realize the Germans have created something they cannot easily overcome. Hamburg enters the story during the middle years of the war, when the city becomes one of the most important industrial and port hubs left in German hands. By the time the calendar moves into 1942, Allied planners recognize that the port of Hamburg supports shipbuilding, submarine construction, fuel storage, and supply routes for the Northern Front. Because of this, reconnaissance flights intensify, and with them comes a growing sense of danger. Pilots approach the city expecting strong flak, but they do not expect what rises from the center districts. Hamburg now has its own Flaktürme, built with the same massive concrete blocks and crowned with the same twin-barrel 128mm weapons as Berlin. The first reconnaissance crews approaching Hamburg see the towers from miles away. They appear like solid gray cubes planted in the landscape, each one taller than many of the surrounding buildings. The port's cranes and warehouses look fragile in comparison. The pilots assume they face another familiar heavy flak zone. What they do not realize is that Hamburg's towers work in pairs, with overlapping fields of fire planned well in advance. This creates a trap that is not immediately visible until the bursts begin. The moment Allied aircraft enter range, the rhythm of the city changes. Inside the Flaktürme, radar teams track the incoming flight across the coastline. The operators pass data to the fire control center, where officers calculate angles and distances. The gunners on the roof wait for orders with shells ready, hands already resting on metal grips. The air is calm, filled only with the mechanical hum of the elevation motors adjusting the twin barrels. Then the fire command reaches the platform, and the Zwilling erupts with its signature double blast. The shells streak upward with terrifying force. The shockwave spreads across the top of the tower and rolls along the nearby streets. Civilians on the ground glance up and see two bright points of flame coming from the roof of the structure. Many have grown used to normal flak fire, but this is different. The Zwilling's muzzle flash is brighter and sharper. The sound feels heavier, as if the earth itself is responding to the shot. For the reconnaissance crew, the first volley feels immediate and unexpected. The shells appear almost without warning, rising fast enough that the pilot barely has time to react. The aircraft begins a sharp tilt away from the rising storm of fragments. The photographer holds onto the equipment, trying to keep the camera steady long enough to capture even a single image of the shipyards. The navigator calls out new headings as bursts appear ahead of the plane. The crew realizes that the fire is coming from two different towers, with one slightly behind the other. This overlapping pattern compresses the airspace into a narrow corridor with almost no safe angle. The Zwilling mounts on Hamburg's towers fire again. Their rapid double shots create a rhythm in the sky that feels relentless. Shells burst into fragments, dropping bright sparks through the sunlight. The pilot senses more volleys coming from below and tries to climb, but climbing makes the aircraft slower and exposes it to batteries placed farther inland. Descending brings it closer to the port's heavy defenses. There is no easy solution. Every change in altitude opens a new threat. Inside the towers, the crews move with disciplined speed. Ammunition lifts run continuously, bringing shells up from the deep storage rooms. Loaders slam them into the breaches with practiced strength. Fire control data updates every few seconds as radar operators track each small movement of the aircraft. Sweat gathers on the gunners' uniforms as the barrels heat up from repeated firing. The entire top platform becomes a machine of constant motion and noise. Hamburg's geography also makes the towers more effective. The flat terrain around the city allows the guns to track targets for longer periods. The wide port basin reflects sound, making the blasts echo across the water. Reconnaissance crews flying over the northern coastline hear the firing before they even reach the main districts. Some crews turn away early, others continue but leave with incomplete photographic coverage, unable to hold steady flight paths long enough for detailed images. Even the most skilled pilots struggle to maintain control under such pressure. Reports from returning crews begin to describe Hamburg as a zone where the sky feels locked by German fire. Intelligence officers study the photographs and note gaps where essential targets should appear. The missing details create real problems for Allied strategy. Without accurate photos of submarine pens or storage depots, bombing missions must rely on outdated information. The lack of clarity forces longer planning cycles and delays operations that depend on precise targeting. Back in Hamburg, the towers grow into symbols of endurance. Despite several attempts by Allied bombers to hit them during night raids, the structures show little damage. Flames and smoke from surrounding districts often rise around them, but the towers remain standing, cold and solid. Crews inside report small vibrations from near misses, but nothing more. As the raids continue, the towers become places where civilians gather during alerts because they trust the thick concrete far more than normal shelters. For reconnaissance pilots, the psychological weight becomes as significant as the physical danger. The twin-barrel flashes create a sense of being hunted. Each approach feels like entering a zone where the city itself rises to strike back. Pilots exchange warnings before departure, reminding each other to avoid specific angles and altitudes where the towers have the strongest reach. Even so, some missions continue to return with damage, holes in wings, or shattered glass in the cockpit. By the beginning of 1943, Allied air commands understand that normal reconnaissance methods can no longer guarantee safe passage over Berlin and Hamburg. The Flaktürme towers have become fixed zones of extreme danger, each armed with twin 128mm guns that respond faster and reach higher than anything the Allies have previously faced. Reports from returning crews describe the same problem again and again. The towers make no mistakes. They fire quickly, accurately, and without hesitation. Commanders must now decide how to adapt before losses grow to levels that threaten the entire intelligence program. Meetings begin in London, where intelligence officers, pilots, and engineers gather to discuss the severity of the situation. Large maps of Berlin and Hamburg cover the tables, marked with colored circles showing where reconnaissance planes have been forced to turn away. Lines show proposed flight paths, but many of them cut straight into the tower's range. Analysts compare angles, altitudes, and speeds, noting where aircraft suffered damage or came close to destruction. It becomes clear that the high twin barrels on the towers are creating a dome of fire that closes faster than crews can react. The first attempt to adapt involves changes to altitude. Crews are ordered to fly higher, hoping to rise above the effective range of the twin-barrel guns. This modification works only briefly. Pilots find that although the guns lose precision at extreme altitudes, the towers still manage to reach them with dangerous bursts. The shells travel upward with such speed that the crews cannot rely on height alone. Cameras also struggle at these new limits. The pictures captured from extreme altitudes lose clarity, and the loss of detail creates new problems for planners. Next comes the idea of adjusting timing. Instead of flying predictable early morning or late afternoon missions, crews begin conducting flights at unusual hours, including periods when the sun sits low on the horizon. The theory is that glare or shifting shadows may make it harder for the tower crews to track them, but the tower's operators quickly adapt. Radar teams simply lock onto the aircraft regardless of light conditions. The fire control officers follow the data on their instruments, unaffected by the sun. The twin barrels respond whether the sky is bright or dim. Another adaptation focuses on approach angles. Pilots are instructed to avoid direct lines toward the towers. Instead, they enter the cities from shallow, sweeping paths meant to limit how long they remain in the overlapped firing zones. Reconnaissance crews train on these new patterns, practicing smooth arcs that keep them moving without predictable pauses. Yet even these curved paths prove challenging. The towers sit in central districts where their fields of fire stretch outward like wide fans. As long as the plane passes within range, the Zwilling can adjust quickly enough to send shells close. Inside briefing rooms, frustration grows among commanders. They understand the value of accurate reconnaissance for bombing campaigns. Without proper images, bomber crews must rely on old maps, rough estimates, or scattered intelligence reports. This leads to misdirected raids, missed targets, and wasted resources. The lack of reliable photographs becomes a strategic problem as much as a tactical one. Planners need a solution that can gather usable data without losing aircraft to the tower's fire. Some propose using faster aircraft. The idea gains support when pilots flying new high-speed models report that speed gives them slightly better odds of escaping the tower's tracking. But even fast aircraft cannot fully outrun the shell patterns. The Zwilling's bursts still reach them if they venture too close. The speed advantage reduces risk but does not eliminate it. Pilots describe moments where shells streak past their canopies even while traveling at maximum velocity. Inside the towers, the crews observe these changes with growing awareness. Radar teams notice the new flight paths and adjust their sweep patterns. Fire control officers detect the shifts in altitude and timing. They adapt as quickly as the Allies. The rhythm of their work remains calm and steady, even when the sky grows crowded. The twin barrels continue to fire in a controlled sequence that sends shock waves through the heavy concrete platform. The gunners act with confidence, knowing the tower's elevated positions give them a clear reach across the surrounding districts. In London, analysts begin another adaptation. Instead of trying to defeat the towers directly, they suggest approaching the problem indirectly. Crews start focusing on areas just outside the tower's strongest zones. By piecing together photographs from several angles, analysts attempt to build composite images that still provide useful detail. This method requires more flights and more careful planning, but it reduces the number of direct encounters with the towers. The quality of the intelligence decreases, yet it remains better than nothing. Reconnaissance crews also experiment with new camera angles. Instead of flying directly above a target, they take oblique photos while banking sharply around the edges of the tower's zones. These angled photographs distort shapes, but analysts learn to correct them using calculations. Every small adaptation becomes part of a growing system designed to survive the tower's dominance. However, the pressure on crews remains intense. The towers loom in their minds before every mission. Even with new tactics, the fear does not fade. Pilots approach the cities knowing that a single mistake could place them inside the range of the twin barrels. They prepare mentally for the thunder that can erupt at any moment. Some admit that even the sight of the towers from a distance sends a chill through the cockpit. By the end of 1943, the Allies have developed enough countermeasures to reduce losses, but none of them fully solve the problem. The Flaktürme towers remain central obstacles, resisting every attempt to neutralize or bypass them. They force reconnaissance to become slower, more complex, and more dangerous than ever before. The tension now reaches a point where the entire intelligence network strains under pressure. By the beginning of 1944, reconnaissance crews feel the weight of every mission into German airspace. The Flaktürme towers in Berlin and Hamburg stand unchanged, their concrete walls untouched by months of attacks. Their twin 128mm guns firing with the same precision and strength as the day they were installed. Allied crews now talk about these towers before each flight. They discuss the angles to avoid, the altitudes that offer a small advantage, and the moments when evasive action becomes necessary. Even the most experienced pilots understand they must enter each mission with full focus, because one careless decision can bring them directly into the path of the rising shell patterns. The atmosphere inside reconnaissance bases grows tense. Briefing officers stand in front of large blackboards, covered with arrows, circles, and warnings. They explain expected weather, predicted enemy fighter locations, and the latest estimates of the tower's firing zones. Every crew understands that the towers react faster than mobile batteries and reach higher than traditional flak. This knowledge slowly shapes the mindset of the men tasked with collecting the images needed for the bombing campaigns. The skies over Germany no longer feel like empty space. They feel like corridors filled with unseen traps. Pilots often speak about the psychological pressure more than the physical risk. Many describe the moment when the city appears in the distance and the shadow of the Flaktürme rises in the corner of the cockpit window. Even from far away, the towers look imposing, their walls straight and cold, their tops flat like the deck of a fortress. Seeing them triggers an immediate sense of danger. Pilots know that the gunners on those towers require only seconds to adjust the twin barrels and open fire. The shells move so quickly that the crew may not even see the first shot until it streaks past the wing. Reconnaissance aircraft sometimes return with long tears across the fuselage or shattered glass along the cockpit frame. Ground crews gather around the damaged planes, examining the marks left by fragments from the Zwilling shells. These marks tell stories of near disaster. They show how close the towers come to hitting the aircraft with direct, lethal strikes. Each plane that returns in one piece becomes a reminder of how precise the towers can be. Some missions end with crews abandoning attempts to photograph important sites. The pilot may see the first upward bursts and veer sharply away, choosing survival over complete intelligence. This leads to partial photos, blurred images, or incomplete mosaics that analysts struggle to interpret. Sometimes the crews attempt a second approach, only to find the sky filling again with violent flashes from below. In these moments, the pilots understand that the towers cannot be rushed or fooled easily. They hold their ground, forcing the Allies to adapt every day. Inside the towers, the crews remain calm and disciplined. They do not see the fear their fire creates, but they hear reports of incomplete missions and damaged aircraft. This motivates them to maintain their pace. Radar operators refine their tracking, adjusting for the higher speeds of new Allied aircraft. Fire control officers revise calculations to account for unusual flight patterns. Gunners train to manage the heat building inside the twin barrels during extended engagements. Every layer of the tower's operation works smoothly, creating an efficient system that denies airspace with remarkable consistency. As the war turns against Germany on the ground, the towers paradoxically become even more important. Resources around the country begin to collapse under the pressure of Allied advances. Airfields shrink, fuel stocks decrease, and fighter numbers fall. In this environment, the Flaktürme towers operate as some of the few remaining strongpoints capable of shaping the flow of Allied air operations. The concentration of ammunition and manpower inside them reflects their strategic value. The Luftwaffe cannot stop every bomber formation, but it can continue making reconnaissance flights costly. For Allied planners, the pressure increases further. Bombing missions rely on fresh intelligence, especially as German command centers, rail lines, and industrial sites move, disperse, or rebuild. Without clear photographs, bomber crews may fly into outdated zones, missing relocated targets, or dropping ordnance on empty sites. Reconnaissance becomes more important than ever, and yet it grows more dangerous with every month that passes. This creates a cycle where each mission feels heavier and more urgent than the last. Pilots begin to describe the towers as a presence rather than a structure. They say the towers feel like living guardians, watching the sky and waiting for them to cross invisible thresholds. Some compare the firing of the twin barrels to engines turning on inside the Earth itself. The psychological effect reaches a point where even the calmest crews admit they feel tension hours before approaching Berlin or Hamburg. The knowledge that the towers survive every bombing raid, always ready for the next mission, adds to the pressure. As spring moves into summer of 1944, the Allies commit more aircraft to escort recon missions. Fast fighters accompany the reconnaissance planes in hopes of distracting flak gunners or drawing fire. But the towers do not waste ammunition on fighters unless they enter their primary zones. Their priority remains the reconnaissance aircraft, the ones responsible for triggering Allied bombing waves. This selective targeting makes the towers even more frustrating because escorting fighters cannot easily reduce their threat. With each passing month, the struggle reaches a breaking point. Reconnaissance continues, but crews feel the growing strain. The towers become symbols of endurance, monuments to the idea that Germany can still defend its airspace. The Allies can no longer ignore the psychological and operational weight of these structures. By early 1945, the shape of the war changes completely. Allied armies advance across Germany, pushing deeper each week, while Soviet forces move in from the east with unstoppable momentum. The Flaktürme towers in Berlin and Hamburg still stand tall, their concrete walls unbroken, their twin 128mm guns ready to fire. Yet the role of these giants begins to shift. They once served as the heart of the city's air defenses, forcing reconnaissance pilots to reconsider every approach. Now they face a new kind of threat that does not come from the sky, but from the ground. Reconnaissance crews approaching the cities notice the change first. They see fewer German fighters rising to meet them. They hear less radio chatter from enemy control stations. The towers still fire when aircraft enter range, but the rhythm feels different. The bursts appear less frequently, and the pattern of fire seems more controlled, as if ammunition is being reserved. Pilots sense that the once relentless force of the towers is fading, not because of lack of will, but because the rest of the defense network is collapsing around them. Inside the towers, the atmosphere grows tense in a new way. Gunners continue their duties, but the news from outside reaches them through radios and messenger reports. Columns of Allied tanks advance from the west. Soviet artillery closes in from the east. Supplies that once arrived regularly now come sporadically. Ammunition remains plentiful inside the tower's massive stockrooms, but spare parts, food, and medical supplies arrive slowly or not at all. The crews understand that the towers are becoming isolated fortresses surrounded by a rapidly shrinking Germany. For the Allies, the towers remain important reconnaissance targets. Even in the final months, commanders want clear images of their positions and structural integrity. Pilots continue to fly over Berlin and Hamburg, capturing photographs of roads, rail lines, and defensive positions. When they pass near the towers, they still feel flashes of danger. The twin barrels respond with bursts that climb toward them, though with less frequency. The pilots observe the tower's surfaces through their lenses. The concrete remains smooth, unbroken, and unchanged by years of bombing. The structures appear as indestructible as ever. As ground forces close in on Hamburg, infantry units report the same impression. From a distance, the Flaktürme looks like a giant bunker carved from the earth. Shells fired at it by tank guns bounce off or leave shallow scars. Artillery strikes shake dust from the edges but do not penetrate the walls. Soldiers advance cautiously, aware that the tower can still fire on aircraft overhead. Yet they also understand that taking the city requires neutralizing these structures without destroying half the surrounding district. Inside Hamburg's tower, crews experience the final days with mixed emotions. They know the war is lost, but the tower still functions. Radar screens still track aircraft. Fire control officers still update calculations. The twin 128mm barrels remain operational. The men inside the tower continue working, partly out of duty and partly because the fortress they occupy feels separate from the collapsing world outside. The thick walls shelter them from the destruction of the city, creating a strange sense of isolation from the war's final chaos. Berlin's towers face even greater pressure as Soviet troops advance street by street. Artillery pounds the surrounding districts. Buildings collapse in clouds of dust. Fires spread across residential blocks. The Flaktürme stands above this destruction like a silent monument. Soviet tank crews attempt to test the tower's resilience, firing rounds that break apart on the concrete. Infantry units approach carefully, aware that the tower still houses hundreds of defenders. The structure becomes not only an anti-aircraft platform, but also a refuge for civilians seeking protection from the fighting outside. Allied reconnaissance aircraft capture images of these scenes from above. They show cities where chaos spreads around structures that remain almost untouched. Analysts marvel at the engineering that created such fortresses. Bomb craters surround them. Rooftops collapse nearby, but the towers stand without significant cracks. These images confirm what pilots have sensed for years. The towers were nearly invulnerable to aerial attack, and neutralizing them required ground forces rather than bombs. When Berlin finally falls, the towers do not collapse through combat. They remain standing even as German command structures surrender. Soviet troops enter them cautiously, expecting resistance that never fully materializes. Inside, they find large amounts of unused ammunition, intact machinery, and the towering twin barrels pointed silently toward the sky. The crews, exhausted and cut off, surrender without further fighting. The structure that once filled Allied pilots with dread now becomes a static monument to a defense strategy that outlasted the war, but not the nation. Hamburg's towers experience a similar fate. They remain intact when the city surrenders. Allied forces inspect them and confirm that the concrete walls are so thick that specialized equipment will be required to demolish them. In some cases, the towers are repurposed after the war because they are too massive to remove without extraordinary effort. Their existence becomes a reminder of the lengths Germany went to defend its cities and of the challenge these structures pose to air operations. As the war closes, the Flaktürme towers transition from feared anti-air guardians to silent relics. Their twin 128mm guns no longer fire. Their radar rooms darken. Their ammunition lifts rest unused. The towers that once forced reconnaissance pilots to approach with fear become historical artifacts, standing for decades as symbols of an air defense network that pushed engineering beyond normal limits. The story ends with the realization that no Allied pilot ever destroyed a Flaktürme from the air. They were defeated not by altitude or speed, but by armies advancing on the ground. Their walls survived the bombings, their guns survived the raids, and their legacy survived the war as one of the most formidable fixed defensive structures ever built.